my presentation, I'd like to attempt to define the word agile, which is very commonly used now, talk about the difference between agile working and flexible working, list the benefits of business of agile working, then I'm going to look at the world of work 10 years from now, and then finally talk about initiating agile working projects and sustaining agile working initiatives. Just by way of introduction, I and my company, Jack Professional Services, have helped a number of organizations in various sectors in adopting new ways of working. Just to give you some examples. For Woking Borough Council, I project managed a smart working project, bringing together streams for IT, property, and HR. For GAP, which is an environmental charity based in a London office, we looked at their current ways of working and use of IT and made a number of recommendations on how, by adopting new ways of working, they could become more productive and efficient and work away from their office. For ENEI, which stands for the Employment Network for Equality and Inclusion, we've been looking at the links between ways of working, personality, and performance. And the results of that study will be announced tomorrow in London at the ENEI's Agile Working Conference. Okay, so what do we mean by Agile? Well, my dictionary definition is the ability to move nimbly with speed and ease. I think in the world of work, we're probably talking as much about mental agility. So the dictionary definition for that is the flexibility of mind, a tendency to anticipate or adapt to uncertain or changing situations. We also talk a lot about agile organizations these days. And Paul Winter's definition of organizational agility is the ability to change routines without resistance. I developed this progression model for agile working last year. It starts with the traditional office. Now, traditional offices have been with us 100 years or so, still quite prevalent. They have a number of advantages in that people are in the same office and the technology is pretty well established and quite secure. So a traditional office worker is someone who comes in the same time every day and goes to work in the same place every day. The first change to that was really the adoption of flexi-time back in the 70s, where people could work at start or finish at different times, probably covering a core period of time. Home working really took off with the Employment Act of 2000, where people with childcare responsibilities, this is now being increased to all employees, could request the right to work flexibly, and home working, working perhaps 1 or 2 days a week, was a very popular option. Obviously, with good broadband speeds, working at home can be quite an effective way of working these days. There's always been a need for people to work out of the office to meet clients, carry out inspections, but the development of mobile telephony has really made this a very feasible option for a lot of people to work out and about. Smart working was introduced with the slogan, work smarter, not harder. In effect, particularly in the public sector, it's been driven by bottom line benefits. By encouraging staff to work out of the office at home or elsewhere, it's been possible to reduce the office space required by sharing desks, and then to either sell or lease the surplus accommodation to give a bottom line benefit. Agile working is really the current state of the art in the ways of working. A big technology input there to enable that, but it is far more transformational than smart working, rather than, which is more about process improvement. So one way of defining agile working is to look at its dimensions. The dimension of time, people can choose when they work in terms of the times of day or the days of the week if they have a compressed working arrangement, or even which weeks in the year if they have perhaps term time working. Second dimension is location. Obviously people can work in very many places, as well as the office and at home. They can work at clients' premises, in cafes, hotels, and even while traveling. But it's the third dimension of autonomy that really defines agile working. As well as deciding when and where they can work, they can now decide how they work. If they meet the goals that have been set for them to the standards required, then how they do that within limits is down to them, and they are an agile worker. So we have the first of our polling questions now, and I'll hand you back to Merv to look after those. So just to define the difference between agile working and flexible working, and unfortunately people are still using flexible working when they mean agile working, and sometimes in the other way around. Flexible working is very much really a focus on when people work, a concern of when they are working. There are rewards for the time and effort that you put in, and quite often the culture is based on procedures or following procedures. It's generally regarded as an employee-centered benefit, that is, people can request to work flexibly. And around the time of beginning of this century, seems a long time ago, work-life balance was coined and has now become quite well established. And basically that's saying that there are boundaries between the time you spend on work activities and the time you spend on social and personal activities, and we don't cross those boundaries. Agile working should really be seen as a value-creating activity. You get rewards for the quality of the outputs you produce, not the efforts you put in to reach them. The culture is very much based on trust. Agile workers are quite often out of sight and not working at the same time as others, so trust is quite key there. And very importantly, it's seen as an employer-centered benefit. There are business benefits, and I'll cover those in a moment. So therefore, quite a few organizations are adopting agile working because there are those business incentives. However, you still have the employee-centered benefits of flexible working. So for employers and employers, it should be a win-win situation. And then there's another concept called work-life integration. The boundaries between time for work activities and social and personal activities have become quite porous. So to give you an example, the devices that we use these days, one moment we might be checking our business emails, another moment our personal emails, we might be booking business travel, and then a restaurant for a social occasion. We don't wait until the end of the working day before we do our social activities, and we probably don't wait until the beginning of the next working day before we check on some of the business requirements. So depending on the type of work that you do, we are finding that work-life integration is beginning to replace work-life balance. So what are the business benefits of agile working? Well, very quickly, because you have a more responsive workforce, if they're agile workers, then you can provide an enhanced responsive customer service. A number of studies have shown, including the one we're doing for ENEI, that if people can choose the way they work, they tend to be more productive in the work that they do. People don't have to go into offices because they're working at home or elsewhere. Therefore, the amount of commuting is reduced, which all helps the environment. One benefit that perhaps is not always realized is to do with business continuity. Those of you who are traditional workers and work in one office, if that office is hit by a catastrophic event, such as a fire, then that has a big impact on the business. However, if most of the workforce are working in an agile way, then the loss of an office is far less significant. And of course, there are cost reductions in adopting agile working. I've already mentioned the reduction in property costs. There will be a reduction in travel costs. There's less need with conferencing technology for people to travel between offices. If people are happy in the way that they're working, there's less staff turnover and you're saving in recruitment costs. And if you can choose how, when, and where you work, then dealing with minor unforeseen incidents like a child's illness can often be catered with without having to take the day off. So let's look 10 years from now, 2025. Now this is my interpretation of a number of research papers that have been recently published. I've already said that there's much less need for offices, and I think the various offices that we have in our cities will be converted into hotels or living apartments. If we don't have offices to go to, then we won't need to commute. We won't need the rush hour on either trains or on our motorways. There's considerable developments in conference technology coming along, 3D video conferencing, virtual handshakes. So the need for face-to-face meetings will disappear, and I think the business case for high-speed trains is now looking quite shaky. With increased developments in artificial intelligence, we'll have very accurate speech recognition, so we'll be able to enter information by voice, so we won't need keyboards, and we'll control our devices by voice or by gestures. So it's goodbye keyboard and probably goodbye mouse as well. There are developments in intelligent software agents that will do the monitoring and the control aspects of staff activities. So we'll need fewer middle managers to carry out these tasks. So that leaves us with technology, and I think it's pretty sure bet there will be technology still required 10 years from now. The devices we use then may look very different from the ones you can see on the screen. Another aspect of technology will be for home workers. We already have robotized vacuum cleaners. I think it's likely we'll all have our personal robot that will look after our household chores while we're working at home. If we're lucky, it might even make a decent cup of tea for us. Okay, so let's go back to the present day. There are 4 T's for successful agile working in my book. Technology, obviously, has to be robust and reliable. We have to mitigate against the threats through working in all sorts of places these days. Those could be in the intrusion into our communications or the loss of data, and in many cases both corporate and personal data are being held on personal devices by staff. To adopt new ways of working, employers will need training. In my experience, that works best with facilitated workshops so that employers can make their input into how new ways of working will be adopted. And I've already mentioned trust. That is key to successful agile working. There needs to be trust between the manager and the people who report to them, but also between colleagues for this to work well. Now, managing agile workers is quite a challenge. They're not there to be seen all the time. Those of you who may be aware of McGregor's management style will know that he has 2 styles. One is the Theory X view, where the manager thinks that basically everyone dislikes work, therefore they must be coerced and controlled, and really they prefer to be directed. So a Theory X manager is quite controlling. In contrast, a Theory Y manager thinks that people view work as just being as natural as play and rest. They will therefore exercise self-direction and control, and they will learn to accept and seek responsibility. So a Theory Y manager is far more supportive manager.
Which type of manager is your boss? Are they Theory X controlling or Theory Y supportive? And I guess we need to reassure you at this stage that we don't know who's voting for what, just in case they don't realize they are either X or Y. So just to keep you informed, we now have about 250 people on the call. We've got 70% of you voted. I'll let it go a little higher, let it go over the 80%, and then I'll close the poll and flick across to the results. So here we go, closing the poll and then sharing the results. So in terms of theory X controlling, we've got 22%, and theory Y supportive 78%. So quite a marked difference. Over to you, John.
Right, thanks, Merv. Right, well, that's well, commiserations to those of you that are in the 22% category, but good news for the rest of you, and I think that means that you and your management and possibly organisation are well placed to adopt Agile Working. So we talked about managers. What about Agile workers themselves? There are a number of ways that people can adopt Agile Working. You might be an isolationist. This means that you've got that report to write, so you take yourself off, you don't answer the phone, you don't respond to emails, you get the report done. Fine, but that's quite a selfish way of working. What about your colleagues? They may need to cover your absence while you're getting on with this report writing. Or if you're a team leader and some of your team members hit problems, how do they know to get advice and direction if you're not communicating with them? You might be a time shifter. Basically, you just want to work at different times than the more normal ones to accommodate your work-life integration. And the important thing here is you let your colleagues know when you are available and when they'd like to get a response if they send you an email or try and get hold of you in other ways. We should recognize that there'll be some people that are not comfortable in terms of Agile working. They much prefer working in an office, the support of colleagues. We call these reluctant absentees. For example, if you hit a problem, it's much easier to ask across the desk, what should I do, rather than formalize that by putting it in an email or even phoning someone up and perhaps disturbing them to answer what you think might be quite a minor issue. And then if you've really cracked this, you've got your communications right, then it doesn't really matter where you work. You will still be able to maintain all the activities you would normally do, and your colleagues won't be impacted by the absence, physical absence of yourself from the office. Okay, so we now have the final of the 3 poll questions, Merv. So just concluding, I think the key ingredients for Agile Working are to focus on performance. That's really why Agile Working is being adopted by organizations, is to improve performance through enabling employees their choice of working styles. We need to look to encourage innovation, not just all from technology, but obviously a big part, but also looking at different ways of doing things. People need to be valued, very important, and particularly those reluctant absentees, they need to be valued as well. And as I said now for the 3rd time, we need to build trust in the organization.
It's a pleasure to be given the opportunity to speak to you all today. I'm going to discuss business change and how it can be planned and carried out using Agile techniques to realize benefits early and often. So just a bit about DSTM, of which I'm current chairman, as Merv said. It's a not-for-profit organization whose mission is to promote best practice in Agile project and program management and delivery. As you see from the timeline, it's now 21 years old and is the only full project and program management framework for Agile. I'm not going to go into detail about me, as this slide does, only to say that I was lead author of the Agile Program Management Guidance, which is what we're talking about today. So to discuss business change a little, I believe business change is about moving from a current state, the status quo if you like, to a new state that adds benefit to an organization. And this normally brings with it some disruption and can cause some problems. Now, the main reasons for those problems are actually people. There's a good book by Malcolm Gladwell, The Tipping Point. There's a quote there, the success of any kind of social epidemic is heavily dependent on the involvement of people with a particular and rare set of social skills. So I think that is very true. Now, why is it such a problem? Well, typically change, you're trying to change the culture of an organization, which quite often means changing the power structures. So what that leads to is both employees and managers actually feeling threatened. And normally they feel threatened because of a lack of understanding of what the change is and why it's actually happening. Now, one of the main reasons for that is probably a lack of communication about the change. And so, hence, everyone feels, they fear the unknown, and they feel a bit uncertain. So what can we do? So there's nothing new in this slide, but obviously if you have a clear vision for your change, and the one that comes to my mind is John F. Kennedy's vision, I want a man on the moon by the end of the 60s, which actually was done because it was such a clear vision. So if you have a clear vision that you can communicate, then that helps people understand and accept the change even if they don't quite agree with it. The thing about change is if you try and get people to change straight away, so for instance in the picture, if you try to get people to the top of that mountain without any stops along the way, you probably lose people along the way because they're tired or they don't see the point. Whereas if you do things in small steps, you're more likely to succeed. Gives people time to recover, time to accept things. And as long as you can answer the tough questions and ask tough questions, you'll be seen that you actually are behind the change, you know about the change, and you understand it. And that builds the relationships and builds the trust, as John was talking about. So I think all of this leads to successful change. So you might ask why I'm talking about change when we're talking about program management. Well, to me, program management, you see a very technical description of program management there. And yes, it is something that you're trying to deliver benefits from by a set of related projects and activities. But actually, what it is a structure for helping you deliver change, for moving the organization from one state to another. Now, that's true of any program, and probably a lot of you are program managers. So what changes when you think about Agile? And John did a good job in describing what Agile is about. And if we put that into a program management context, and to the left you see the guidance that Merv alluded to, so there will be a competition where people can win 2 copies of that based on the best questions at the end of this. But really what we're trying to do is to put an Agile approach into programs, and that's both from the Agile community where they want to use Agile at scale, and also from more traditional community that wants to incorporate Agile into its programs. And what Agile obviously means that you are delivering early and often. So you're actually getting the benefits into the organization early and often. And you do that by letting people get on with things. You trust them to deliver on their projects within certain guidelines, which we'll come back to. And you take an iterative feedback approach as much as possible within the program and within everything around it. Now, within the guidance, to substantiate that, we have 5 principles. And the idea around the principles is that if you always have these in your mind, then you will have a successful Agile program and you will be working in an Agile way. So the first principle, this one, program goals are clearly and continuously aligned. What this is saying is there's no point in continuing a program if where the business is going has actually changed. So you always need to ensure that where the business strategy is today, because change will hit you, the business strategy will change, it still makes sense to do the program. If not, stop it or change its course or whatever, but don't go on regardless, make sure it is still aligned. And then you want to get the results of the program out as soon as possible so people can benefit as soon as possible. So to find ways where you can actually deliver benefits incrementally and as early as possible. Anyone who tells you in Agile that governance is not important, that is actually rubbish. Governance is as important in Agile as in anything else. But what we need to make sure of is that the governance makes sense for what we are doing. So when we talk about programs, the governance should actually be around creating capabilities that lead us towards the program vision and goals, and that those capabilities actually work. Any other governance should be questioned. And then related to governance, you want to get the decision making where it's most impacted. So the people doing the job should make the decisions as much as possible. Now there's some ifs and buts about that. So if you have projects within your program that are interdependent, then the decisions may need to go higher to check that decisions in one project don't adversely affect another, for instance, or where they may affect the program vision. Is that okay or not? Those decisions need to go upwards. And within the programs themselves, when you're designing the programs, you're taking iterative approaches. So you're thinking, will this work? No, it won't. Coming back to it, changing it. And also iterative in the sense, as you deliver incrementally, learn from the experiences and change the program moving forward. We also recognize that programs will, by nature, contain bits that you just can't do in an agile way. And so we incorporate hybrids. I'll introduce a case study that I'll refer back to at this point. So briefly, an organization I worked for had a certain structure, but that structure was not tax efficient. We were losing tens of millions of pounds every year in tax that we didn't need to pay. So the vision was to restructure the organization into a new set of companies in order to be tax efficient. It's a clear vision, even if some people may not agree with it, because it's the owners of the company that actually benefit at the end of the day. As you see there, we wanted to do it, but not affect our customers or suppliers, and not increase our overheads, and get benefits out there earlier. I'll come back to the case study as we go through. Within the Agile Program Management, what we've tried to do is to incorporate the best of Agile, the best of the empowered teams working towards a goal, and iterative feedback, but put some structure and control around it so that we can be sure that the programs will meet their visions, and will meet their visions within the constraints of time and cost. So this is the life cycle model, which can be used, it's consistent enough to be used by itself, or it can be incorporated with things like MSP, for instance. And when we look at the early stages, these are all about ensuring that the program is worth doing at all. So pre-program and program feasibility. Is it worth doing? Do the benefits actually outweigh the costs, the risks, the disruption of actually doing the program? Because programs can be disruptive. But also they check that the organization is actually prepared, is mature enough to go in an agile way on the program, and to put things in place to ensure that. Now, rather than diving straight in, which is a concern around Agile, there is a stage, a phase to actually set firm foundations, enough firm foundations to move forward. And so you look at the program and you say, well, we're at this stage now, and in the future we want to be at that stage. And you work out waypoints along the way. And we'll come back to this. They are waypoints. You're not planning in detail, but you are doing waypoints along the way to get to your final vision. That makes sense. And typically the waypoints on large programs may be something like 9 months. And also you're ensuring that the architecture, the organizational architecture, not a technical architecture, will make sense as well. Once you've done all that, you can actually go into the very iterative stage of creating capabilities. A capability being something the organization can't do today but wants to do in the future that will add benefit. And there's loads of projects, loads of activities going on during that stage, and you're letting those happen within the constraints. And you're delivering capabilities. And every time you deliver capabilities, you can start to realize benefits. And at some stage, when you reach the end point of a major capability, as I say, around 6 to 9 months, you then review and say, well, have we done enough on this program? Do we need to do any more? If not, close it. If so, then we can carry on. So you see here there are natural gates built in if you need to run gates. Now coming back to incremental delivery of benefits. So here you see prioritized benefits. So in our case study example, the final benefit was a reduced tax bill. But along the way, we can think of a number of benefits that may accrue, and so you can prioritize those benefits so that you can deliver them early. And then you can look at the capabilities that will actually enable those benefits, realize those benefits. And that then gives you a way to plan. But when you are planning, it's important to understand that you can only plan for the immediate future, because the longer-term future will change. Not even may change, will change. It will change because of a change in business landscape, but also based on the experiences of what you've done so far. So there's no point in planning detail beyond the immediate part that you're going to do, which we happen to call tranches. So you plan the milestones or the waypoints in the program, but only plan in detail the thing you're going to do next. And even here, detail is a relative word. So you say what projects you want to do and what activities you need to do in order to be able to enable capabilities to realize benefits. But you don't plan the projects in detail. That's left to the autonomous project and activity team. So if we looked at the case study I mentioned, we ended up with 3 tranches in this case. When we looked at the problem, it made sense to think about 3 areas. One key area to get right was how we would order and deliver goods out with the new company structures, different products being in different companies, but without affecting customers and suppliers too much. That was a major piece of work, a lot of communication with customers, changes to our major ERP system, new companies, legal implications, warehouse restructures in terms of people and products. But because a lot of work was already going on, there was a strain on existing staff and already a cost of trying to do it in a manual way. So there was an immediate benefit from that tranche where we could actually reduce the amount of effort required. Once that was done, we could look at the accounting capabilities, new chart of accounts, new reporting, new account structure, etc. And that gave us the benefit of a more efficient accounting, but also to understand how the profit and losses looked and were we actually going to get those lower tax bills, etc. And finally, we could actually do the full separation of the company into putting people into different companies, different new employment contracts, all of that. And taking that approach really helped. The reason the first 2 were blanked out was that they were fuzzy, and they only became clear as we got to the end of the previous tranche. So the final part of my presentation is around the organizational structure that we put into programs. And you see here on this diagram that there are 2 main components, the program management team and the capability delivery team. The program management team is there to steer and guide, and rather than being command and control, as John said in his slides about the different people, they are an agile way of managing. So you set people the overall vision and goals, and they work within that. Now, if they start to deviate from that, then you can bring them back. If the program vision is in danger, you bring them back, obviously. Now, to understand these roles, I'll just superimpose the actual people who took these in the case study. So here you see at the top the business program owner, who ultimately owns the vision and really wants it to happen, needs to be charismatic, needs to be someone who will be involved but not get involved in the detail, let people get on with it. So the group company's VP Finance was someone who was well respected in the company, but because he was on the owner's board, had the seniority to be able to do it. The business change owners, they're responsible in their lines of business to make sure that the benefits expected from the program will actually get into their line of business, and they are business managers. And here you see, because these areas were the main ones affected, that they were the key business change owners. I, as program manager, need to make sure the program delivers, but empower the teams to actually do that. And over the project, there were a number of different over the program, there were a number of different program teams at different times, different capability teams. Just a little on the technical architect. The name implies that could be an IT technical or construction technical or something. But in our context, it's anything technical within a program. So within ours, the legal technicalities were important, and it was important that we would stick within those, and the finance technicalities. So we had technical architects in those areas, as well as a more traditional enterprise architect, for instance. The last thing to mention on here is the business analyst from IT as a stakeholder engagement coordinator. We think stakeholder engagement is so important that all stakeholders understand the program, are ready to commit resources to it, and will really be ambassadors for the program. That there's a special role, and it's a skill set rather than a very senior role. So the senior people in program management team are engaging with stakeholders, and this role really makes sure it all happens, everyone understands, etc. So almost at the end of the presentation, and just to reiterate what we said about governance. So you see here three layers of governance, and notice the arrows are going upwards. So as much as possible, the capability teams control their own destiny, and it's only at certain points that they need to get decisions from the program board or from the strategy team. As I said, for interdependencies, things that affect the program vision, things like that. And the point is the governance needs to be unbureaucratic, not bureaucratic, and well communicated, and take the principle of decisions at the lowest possible level.
Do you have any concerns that this evolution in working practices takes the social interaction and therefore the human element out of it all?
Right. I think I'd turn that round. I think it is quite important to maintain that social interaction, but I think that social interaction takes many forms these days. Obviously, we have the whole advent of social media. What we found in the ENI survey was that across the board, regardless of personality type, there was not that much interest in social events, even though those organizations quite often put themselves out to do that. I think those of us who work agilely probably see people less, but it doesn't mean we don't communicate any less, obviously emails, but also through, still make a lot of use of phone calls. So I don't feel particularly isolated, but I think it is important that certainly if you're a team leader, you make sure that if you adopt this new way of working, that social interaction is maintained between your team members.
Most things that this person has heard about relating to Agile. There's a strong focus on co-location of teams, the real opposite of remote working. Can you explain how these approaches fit together?
Right. Yeah. I think there is there's a divergence of thought there. There is one view, and this will be a Google view. Those of you who've heard about their headquarters in London, where you throw people together to spark ideas, not only employees of Google, but employees. I think it's an arts institution that they've co-located to sort of spark ideas. So that's one view. The other view is that people actually find an office environment quite disruptive, and if they want to get on with things, they much prefer a quieter space. And some offices are now being designed with different types of facilities for energetic creative activities, but also quiet areas to do that. It also, I mentioned the personality side. That is another factor as well. There are those of us who are conscientious, for example, and really want to get on with things. There are those of us who have a more influential personality and really are people, if I can use that phrase, and want the company of others. So it is a more considered and sophisticated question to work through. But I think the main thing is to think of different ways of working and not be constrained with how you've always done it in the past.
What's the difference between MSP and Agile project or program management?
I think the difference is the focus. So very much within MSP, the focus tends to be that you do a lot of the planning and design up front, although it isn't actually meant that way, but that's a lot of the time the way it's interpreted. So the focus is in Agile is really to understand that the future is uncertain, and that you need to learn from your experiences, and you need to actually plan only as far as you can see, really. And that's one of the key differences. There are a lot of other differences in the way you do the monitoring control, etc., which I didn't go into today. But one of the key differences is the focus.
How do you make sure an Agile program actually ends? Surely the temptation is just to keep going and going.
Well, this is, if you remember the first principle, program goals are constantly aligned to business strategy. At the end of each major tranche, you are actually reassessing the program to see whether you've done enough. And you have to be hard on yourself. And if you have done enough, the program stops. Or if the business has changed somewhere else, the program stops. Now, what that makes that easier is that you haven't actually set a massive juggernaut going. You can think of it more that you've set a little a flotilla going. So it's easier to move that flotilla, to stop that flotilla, than the massive juggernaut, because you are only committing to the next 6 to 9 months. You're not committing after that. So in that way, it's easier to get it in people's minds that the thing may finish.
What do you have to say in terms of work-life balance?
Right. It's quite a big subject, this. I think, and I mentioned about work-life integration, I've become perhaps a convert to that in the sense that I think it's very difficult now to separate personal and work activities. Obviously, there are certain times when that needs to be firm, for example, looking after children, or if you're ill, and a number of other circumstances. But in many other times, there is this blurring, and I think if you're in a fortunate position, and not everyone is, you can sometimes wrap work around your personal or family commitments. You know, I think we all sort of, for example, check emails in a quiet period. I can remember somebody saying while they were queuing up for rides at a amusement place, Alton Tower, something like that, they would, because it was dead time, they'd check their emails, because if they did it then, they wouldn't be there to be checked the next day. That's a minor example of work-life integration. I think if people insist on work-life balance boundaries, then that does, in the end, restrict what people are able to do.